Hey, welcome everybody to the Scald channel here, and we're going to be covering the Adepticon errata that's going to be in place for Adepticon. Yeah, so I've got Patrick with me, and also Cameron from on Facebook is also with us here, but he's muted, and I'm sure he'll pop in at some point. Yeah, so we're going to be going over the errata, some of the changes, and using Tabletop Simulator here to help visualize some of it because Patrick's up in Michigan, I'm in Ohio. It's a long drive, so this is the easiest way to do it for you guys. So I'll let Patrick take over now.
Hello everyone. So we're going to talk about the new rule changes that are implemented for the Adepticon tournament. So I'm going to talk about these from top to bottom, go through the overall rule changes that has been made, and then go faction by faction and talk about the weapon changes and the specific ship changes that has been implemented. So starting off, we have a new way. We handle station keeping orders when it comes to debris fields. There has been some mumbling about how ships can hide in debris fields, and nowadays they count as having moved when they do a station keeping order inside a debris field, which means that they will take the 2 hits even if they don't move anywhere. So it's still a viable tactic to hide there if you're under attack from something big and nasty, but nowadays it will hurt a little bit at least.
Yeah, well, I mean, you still get the bonus for having the lock value.
Yeah, and of course it's something that Shaltari were doing a lot, hiding in debris fields where they can still deploy all their launch assets without any penalties.
Okay.
Hmm? So the second topic is one that we're a little bit proud of. It's the ground combat. So for the ground combat, we have done away with the armor saves for each of the tokens, and instead we require a specific number of hits to be allocated to infantry and armor tokens to make them disappear. For armor tokens, it's 2 hits, and for infantry token, it's 1 hit. But to make sure that one infantry token can actually kill one armor token with a little bit of luck, we have said that each infantry token will have 2 attacks. So when you roll your dice, you add up all your attacks as usual, but instead of rolling 4+, you try to roll 5+, and for each 5+, that becomes a hit. It's just like point defense. It's just one roll, and you can easily and quickly just distribute the hits and remove the tokens as you wish.
All right, so in this little small cluster here, we've got 2 tanks versus 3 infantry. So that's going to be 6 attacks on each side because each infantry has 2 and each tank has 3. Now the difference is the Scourge, the purple dice here, will need 2 successful 5s to remove a tank there. So I'll go ahead and roll my dice. And then Patrick can roll his. And he slaughtered them.
Mm-hmm. So
Uh,
with each of my hits, so we have 5s and 6s. I have 4 of those. I score a hit each, which can kill 1 infantry token each. So all the infantry tokens are dead.
and with this roll, I've got 2 successes. And so I could remove 1 armor. If that second roll had counted. If
Mm-hmm.
you end up with like 3 hits and 1 goes on an armor, nothing happens. It just sits there. You need 2 successive or two hits at the same time. The hits don't carry over from one round to the next.
Yeah, so no tracking of damaged targets. You just remove them, or they will live with their full hit points the next turn.
All right, what else do we have? Rules change.
Mm,
So how close or how fast did that take to resolve there, Patrick? That's
yeah, I think it was about 2 seconds each.
yeah. So
There we go.
all right,
No hits.
close the ground combat a lot quicker these days.
Yeah. You don't need to start allocating and discussing armor saves and things like that. It's one roll, and you just assign it and move on.
All right.
So second big change that has happened here is that we have changes to torpedoes. And we all know that torpedoes were slow, it was hard to get them on, and when they were fired at something, they took a turn to actually do something, and the opponent could shake them or drive for debris fields, and in general, they were very ineffective. What we did was that simplify it a little bit and say that, hey, let's make torpedoes closer to bombers. Just use their thrust values just as bombers, and just use the same rules as bombers have by adding, saying that you can, within single thrust, you can score them directly, or with double thrust, you score them the next turn. This increases the range and the reliability of the torpedoes. So I expect to see a lot more torpedo ships on the attack. I'm looking at you, Havanas.
Well, so we've got let's see the dragon here, and I didn't actually even measure this out, but Scourge have 15-inch thrust, can get to this Ajax cruiser turn 2 with a set of torpedoes if it really wanted.
Yes, but like we will, I think we can take that directly here. Scourge has some additional effects on their torpedoes. Corruptor, that has a change as well, so we can discuss this directly. So the Corruptor rule, which was a very convoluted rule, required bookkeeping and the fire effects and rolls. Instead, we said that no, Corruptor will only make if you score a critical hit on the target, the Corruptor will inflict 1 extra damage points at the end of each turn.
So now, as long as you do 1 point of damage, that ship will take 1 damage for the rest of the game.
Yes.
And then what else did we do with torpedoes, Patrick?
So also something that we have looked at is using torpedoes as an additional form of bombardment. And after some discussions, we have decided that I think it's best to just tie them up, just as with bombardment. You can fire at something, not within scan, but now within single thrust. You can fire at a sector or a station. Stations you can fire at double thrust as well, but for sector specifically, it's within a single thrust. So you can fire a torpedo directly at the target, just as if you are bombarding it, but you're doing it in the launch assets phase. And the torpedo will inflict damage on that sector according to the torpedo lock value, which is for most torpedoes 6 damage, 6 attacks, 2 plus lock with 1 damage each.
Right. So UCM have the light torpedoes that are 2 plus lock with 4 damage, which is similar to the Scourge, but Scourge have Corruptor.
Yes, and Corruptor has a very, very special rule nowadays. So when we did this little nerf of Corruptor that they don't do this convoluted damage effect, we thought they need to have something special instead. And the decision was that, of course, torpedoes from Scourge are full of razor worms. Why not deploy some razor worms when you score a hit on the sector? So when you score a hit on the sector, you will be able to deploy 2 infantry tokens representing the razor worms crawling out and starting spreading out in the neighborhood. So you are allowed to place 2 infantry tokens in any sectors in that cluster.
In one sector.
Yeah.
So you can't spread the tokens out. The 2 infantry tokens have to go to one sector in that cluster. Doesn't have to be the one that you targeted with a torpedo.
Exactly. And of course, you may not want to deploy these tokens, and the Scourge are not dumb enough to deploy razor worms on a sector where they actually don't want to have them. So if you don't want tokens in the sector because you're planning on bombarding it, you can just say, I deploy no tokens to it.
That is correct.
And remember also here, everybody, that A space station is also a sector.
So you're telling me, Patrick, I can put some razor worms into a space station that's pretty far away.
Exactly, because here you don't have the requirement that you need to be within single thrust to fire the torpedo. You can fire the torpedo at the double range, which for Scourge means 30 inches away. So for a dragon coming up, it's 8 inches plus 30 inches, which means that turn 1 he's able to deploy razor worms 38 inches up the board, but they won't be deployed until end of turn 2.
Right. So, all you Scourge players out there, especially you guys over in the UK, when you guys get to see Dave next month at Salute, you should really thank him for this ability because, it was his idea and it's wonderful.
Yes, I agree. It's a really nice and fluffy rule, which also will make this very interesting.
All right, so what else do we have on the errata? That's a big change.
Mm. So we have some of the cards, command cards, needs a little bit of update to reflect these changes that we have made. So there are some updates to the command cards that affect ground combat. I'm not going to go through them in detail here, but you have to have a little bit of a look at that because there are some adjustments to armor saves that are not valid anymore.
Perfect.
Mm. So going down here, we have then some weapon changes, but I am going to go through them when we start talking about each faction itself. So let's start from the top in alphabetical order and start with PHR.
Okay.
So the PHR has some very interesting changes. We have some smaller points adjustments to reflect the power level of ships. But then we have the big thing for PHR, which is that all of their light, medium, and heavy caliber weapons on the broadsides have received a fusillade. This means that when a PHR cruiser comes up the board and is able to deploy its weapon banks to the left and right and go weapons free, it can dish out a very large amount of damage very quickly.
So with those changes, so the Ajax in particular could, in theory, shoot 4 frigates if it gets its broadside off.
Yes, it's one of these things where people have complained specifically that the Ajax in its fluff describes how it can target several targets at once, firing its weapons. But in the rules, they are actually fixed, so you can't target that many. So that's something that we actually stepped in and changed. So you split up the light caliber batteries, so they are 6 each, 2 of them on each side, so 4 times 6 light caliber batteries.
And with the amount of destroyers and potentially, just frigates and other things in the game flying around these days, I think you might see an Ajax at least in a few lists, whereas I don't think you were seeing them before.
Yeah, I think so too. And we also have coined the Derek maneuver from playtesting, where he drives up with 2 battle cruisers, max thrusting up the board, turn 1 and turn 2, and on turn 3 he's in between the ships on the enemy side of the board, forcing them to try to deal with these dual battle cruisers ready to do, what is it, 52 shots or something like that per ship.
It's it's intimidating.
Yeah. Mm.
All right. So now they also picked up Fusillade. Did we talk about that?
Yes, I mentioned it. So you see that the batteries all have picked up Fusillade, which means that on weapons 3 they can get increased damage output. So the idea behind this is that they should be able to uh, let a good player capitalize on this. So a player that is able to set up his movement and plan ahead so that he can get his weapons-free broadsides on all sides online should be rewarded for that.
It makes sense to me.
So that's something that we in general try to say, is that if you are a good player and you are able to pull off these more advanced maneuvers, you should be rewarded.
And if you're a mediocre player like me, having a couple of extra shots off of one side of the ship is always a nice bonus.
Yeah, that too. That too. And then we have a little bit of a minor change in point adjustment, is that the Orpheus now costs the same as the Ganymede. Since everyone has from the beginning said that the Orpheus with its light caliber broadsides and its burn through laser was the superior troop ship, but cheaper in points. So now they are actually the same points.
And there is not a error in the errata. The Orpheus did not have its linked gun split up.
Yes. Yes. The reasoning behind that, of course, is that the Orpheus is, after all, a troop ship. It's not the advanced fighting craft that the Ajax or the battle cruisers is.
All
Which
right.
means that it has a little bit of worse weapons than the other ones.
All right. So is
And
that
then I think
cover it for the PHR?
we have one last change here that I think we need to mention. We have all been on the receiving end of the Remus and its apocalypse cannon.
How could I forget about this ship?
Its bombardment cannon, which could decimate a cluster by just looking at it. So what we have done is that we have changed its attack value from 3 to 2 on each barrel, removing 4 of the shots. But of course, we still think it's good enough at its what it does, just that it's not that ridiculous. But looking at it with the torpedoes changes that we have, we still think that the ship itself can handle it.
Well, the Remus has what, fusillade on its bombardment, or it gets more shots when it goes weapons
yeah, it's
free,
got
right?
overcharged.
Yeah, overcharged.
Which means that it can get damage 2 on its apocalypse cannon, making it 8 shots with damage 2. So it's still obliterating sectors.
Yeah.
Yes, not to the ridiculous amount it did before.
But
But remember that now you can use your torpedoes as well. You have 4 torpedoes, and there is no restriction how many torpedoes you can launch on that ship. So you
just
can
as long as it's within thrust.
exactly. So within 12 inches, you can bombard with your apocalypse cannon on weapons free and launch 4 torpedoes at the cluster, potentially probably eradicating it anyway.
Yeah, it's still an amazing ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that I think is the meat of the PHR updates. We can perhaps mention something when we come here to Scourge, the first ship, the Corvette, which has an update that is a little bit subtle. First of all, you have Skull on its weapon. It just was weird that it didn't have Skull on that weapon. But then all Corvettes have received a special rule. And that special rule is that they can fire their air-to-air weapons in atmosphere with 1 better lock value.
So this is actually a rules change to air, where the
Yes,
entire
yes.
rule is basically it's not rewritten, but there's like 2 sentences that were added to it. So
Yes, this means that potentially gets the air-to-air rule, it will get the same thing, but generally speaking, it's only affecting Corvettes and Void Gates.
yes.
But what we have seen is that there has been a lot of talk about strike carriers being the end-all for point scoring, and strike carriers are invincible as soon as they drop into atmosphere. And to trying to combat this, we have made this change so that Corvettes actually can fight on a more equal footing versus the frigates in atmosphere. The change doesn't mean that they can be the only ship that you can have that they can kill things up in orbit, because they don't get this bonus as soon as they go into orbit.
Yeah, it's a nice change. The Corvettes now just taking, two or three of them can bring down a strike carrier, and it helps, fill out some points here, especially with the lock value changes. Scald on the Nakar has, it's just been a little subtle thing, but I mean, now you can take them. They seem just as valid as anything else.
Yes. But with many of these things, it's you try to push it a little bit more towards a rock paper scissors situation, where you have strike carriers get countered uh, free by the corvettes, which can kill them, and then you have regular ships like cruisers. They can kill the corvettes if they go up from atmosphere. So it's a more balanced situation.
Yeah, Echoes did not get more powerful against, their
No,
non-intended prey.
yeah, exactly. Well, which means that the Echoes are actually still a very good ship.
Yes, they are a rock solid Corvette.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think that anyone argued that the Corvettes were a bad ship in any case. But they just they are the ship that received the least love by this change, since they have a both um, orbital weapon and the air-to-air weapons, and the air-to-air weapons doesn't have that many shots, so they are the one that received the least love, but they didn't need that much of love anyway.
Right.
Mm?
Uh,
Yep.
so what else do we have next?
Yeah, so going through the Scourge has several changes here that are interesting. And there are some minor changes to Charybdis, which actually are things that make sense. So the plasma bombs now are reverted back to the Lock 4 plus. Before there was a errata that changed them to 3 plus, but this has been changed to 4 plus again, and that is due to two other changes that has been made. There has always been a bit of confusion why the Charybdis could not bombard from atmosphere, since it can move into atmosphere, but its bombardment cannon can only bombard from orbit. And that has been changed, so we have added a low-level special rule to the Charybdis so it can go into atmosphere and bombard.
So you will see Charybdis in lists, especially with the new race format that's coming out, or just lists in general, because some of the new missions that are um, getting played have elements where you need to stop other people from scoring.
Yeah.
You need to remove key sectors from them. So there's a good reason to bring some Charybdis in your list now. You'll have to
Yes.
make points.
So, which reminds me also another change to bombardment that we didn't mention here, and that is that bombardment ships are also now allowed to bombard space stations. If they are in high orbit, they can shoot at space stations as if they are sectors in atmosphere.
That's a nice change for the different bombardment vessels.
Yeah. So the idea behind this is that there was a certain type of mission where the bombardment ships probably couldn't use their main guns in any meaningful way at all, which means that in a tournament setting you couldn't really take bombardment ships, because in 1/3 of the missions they would probably be useless. But making this, they still need to move up to the station and fire the weapon, so that it's not like they fire away from long range, but they can bombard them just as if they are bombarding a sector.
Well, I'm excited to see more bombardment in Dropfleet.
Yeah, it's a very fun mechanic that has been very underused. So, going down,
Oh,
uh,
Charybdis also got Scald on the
yeah,
plasma bombs.
Skull Dogs on the plasma bombs, because it's plasma. Plasma should have Scald.
And that's why they went up to Lock 4.
Yeah. So all in all, it's the ship has received a more better purpose and a more faction-like type of weaponry. And then going down the list of Scourge ships, we have a change that we all have been saying that it should have been like this from the beginning, and that is that we have replaced the succubus destroyers, close action atmospheric close action weapons uh, with just one entry, because before they had two entries, one for shooting into atmosphere and one entry for shooting things in orbit. That just made no sense. So now there is just one entry for their close action weapons, and that is the atmospheric one, which takes the values from the old low orbit close action weapon,
Works for
making
me.
them, yep, it puts them a little bit. They are a step down from a Jason, but they are also cheaper. So all in all, they suddenly become a little bit more viable when it comes to a ship that can do something.
Perfect. So
Mm.
then next on the list we've got the Chimera, and it just now basically has the same close action weapon as all other Scourge cruisers.
Yes, exactly.
So the Chimera is not a wet noodle in the fight. It's as good as
Yeah,
any other Scourge cruiser now.
yeah. It's one of these weird things where you looked at it and say, why does this ship not have the plasma storm? It should
Yeah.
have had that from the beginning.
I mean that was the ship to get for the species because it was never going to do any damage otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Mm. And going down that list, we have a change that I think many people welcome, and that is that the Basilisk has received a points increase for 10 points. It
And
has
it's
been a ship,
still really worth it.
yeah. So it's a ship that has been able. It's almost been on the same level as the battleships when it comes, or in some cases, much better than battleships. Just because it has been such a versatile, good ship where you can use it for scanning, weapons free, don't receive spikes. You can stealth up the board and all of these things. So it's been a very versatile platform with good firepower output. So we felt that a point increase was warranted.
But the Banshee, on the other hand,
Yes, the Banshee got a slight decrease, and of course the decrease for the Banshee is because its weaponry is compared to the Basilisk just pitiful. It's got a really good close action weapon, but it's got such a low scan that it can never really deploy it effectively without receiving lots of damage in return. And also one other change that was made is that we'll let it have two torpedoes. So it's one torpedo launch asset, which has a limit of two now instead of one, which actually makes it a sort of first few turns. It can stealth up the board and launch torpedoes with deploying things on the board, which means that it's almost like a mini troop ship in itself.
yeah, I mean, as a primarily Scourge player, I can see still taking the Akuma, but I can see bringing the Banshee into the list because it's a utility ship now, and
Yes.
it's wonderful.
Mhm. So going down the list, we have then the battleships, which received a lot of attention because these ships um, have had really awesome models, but they never see play because of the rules, which just made them too bad. So there was some really big changes tested to try to make this viable. In the end, we settled with some less drastic changes that was first proposed. So they are now going in with a slightly lowered signature and increased damage cap on their furnace cannons, which are now called furnace fangs. On top of that, the Dragon has received additional limit on their torpedoes, giving them in total 4 torpedoes to fire away, which we think is a very good option due to the changes that has been made for torpedoes.
So the Dragon is now the Scourge Razor Worm mothership.
Yes, it's full of worms. And the demon, of course, is the damage dealing ship. And one of the big things with that is that it needed to go weapons free to utilize all of its weapons. And that would give it a signature that was just over the roof. So what happened here is that we linked all of its Oculus beam arrays, so it can actually go on standard order and fire away with 8 beam
Damage 2.
weapons. Yeah,
No, it's a solid change. It's not the gravity manipulation that we had before, but that was a
yeah,
bit too much. So
yeah.
yeah,
It might show up in a new unit somewhere along the line, since there was some love towards it, but yeah,
just didn't fit the Scourgy battleships.
yeah. And then of course we have some minor changes to the drones as well, where they get cheaper and slightly lowered signature.
All right, so then that brings us to
Mm,
the Shaltari.
yes, and Shaltari has a couple of major changes them as well. Where we look at, I think the one thing that will be uh, discussed from a Shaltari player point of view is the change to Void Gates, where we have increased their points by 3, so 18 points. And of course, the Void Gate in itself looks like a very innocent ship that you,
We know it's not innocent.
yeah, it's not innocent. It's probably one of the best ships in the game by being able to deploy things all over the board, fire a weapon in the atmosphere, and destroy things that try to land on the same cluster where you try to land things.
So,
And it's got a high speed, big scan on top of that, and a point defense that protects us from corvettes.
uh, yes. So
Yeah.
so it got a points increase.
Yes.
What's next? But this looks like a nerf, Patrick. The
Which one?
the charged air. It looks like a nerf.
Yeah, it looks like a nerf, but in reality, it will have 5+ in atmosphere since it's got air to air. So it's actually not a change at all, except when it's trying to fire outside of atmosphere. And it's charged air. You don't have any real air in low orbit. So we've figured that people won't complain that much about that change. But imagine if we had kept it at 5+, so the Void Gate suddenly got a 4+ to hit things in atmosphere. That would have been ridiculous.
Yes. I mean, this is tabletop simulator. I can flip the table, but
Yeah. Yes. Mm. Going down, we have the first big change, which foreshadow some other changes, is the change to the Jade. And that is that the Jade now has the lock value has been reverted back to the original 3+ on this particle lance, but we've added Fusillade 1. And this is something that we have looked at for all the particle weapons. This goes back also to the thinking that if you manage to set up a situation where you can use your front narrow weapon on weapons free, then you have thought about this the turn before, so you have set it up. Or the opponent has been, say, stupid enough to park his valuable ship in front of this front narrow gun, which
I
is
meant to do that.
yes. And looking at the numbers for it, now the Jade has on weapons free about 50% more firepower than a Topaz. But that is only on weapons free. So it's a ship that suddenly requires more skill to use, but rewards a skillful player. And going down there, we also have, the Opal and its nerf, where you started to require 2 opals to protect your dreadnoughts and battleships. And that really felt for the opal, since it was a staple for use again, protecting the diamond, which means that we felt that it was warranted to give it a point decrease.
Makes
Then
sense.
Yeah, and going down cruisers, we start to have the black sheep of the family, the Shaltari light cruiser. If anyone has ever seen a Shaltari light cruiser on a serious gaming table, let me know because I have never done that.
But you mind.
Hmm? There might be a future for them. Because first of all, we have changed the points for them quite drastically. So from 85 to 70 points, that's a 15-point decrease. And on top of that, the Azurite has received a change to its weapon, its impel weapons. The impel weapons now only have impel 1, and this is across the board for all impel weapons. So you only need to do 1 damage to get the impel effect. And the wording of the impel has changed a little bit. So before you had a little bit of ambiguity if you can use it in a group and how it would work, but now we have straightened that out. So for each damage, for each impel X damage that you manage to inflict to someone. So if you have impel 2, you need to do 2 damage. If you have impel 1, you need to do 1 damage. For each of these damages, you can then perform a turn of the target. So in case of a of these ships shooting at this ship, they can perform a 90-degree turn per hit, or damage per this. So it's damage after armor saves. And this, of course, feels like a very powerful ability if you can use it on a dreadnought, especially on a dreadnought, because there you can start forcing it to do course change maneuvers when it wanted to go weapons free and things like that. And actually, if you have enough of them, you can actually turn it completely around. And then on top of that, just imagine if you had a card that forced it to do a standard order after you pointed it into a large solid object. So I'm not saying that those are combinations that could happen, but I hope I can see them on the table.
Well, you can't turn around a dreadnought, but you can.
Yeah, you can, because what you do is that for dreadnoughts, we have said that for super heavy ships, you can only turn 45 degrees per damage.
No, I'm looking at it right now.
Did we stop the dreadnoughts completely?
It can only be rotated 90 degrees. Oh no, you're right. You're right. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm reading the example,
Yeah, yeah.
not the actual rule.
Yes. So tonnage 15 or higher, the rotation is halved to 5 degrees.
This was another one of those rules that was hard to dial in.
Yeah. So looking at this, you have a harder time. You need to dedicate more firepower to turn around larger ships. But in theory, you can set it up so that you can turn around a dreadnought so it flies into a large solid object if it's parked next to it. I want to see that happen once.
Yes. Well, I
In
mean,
my
but even just taking a pair of the Azurite just to make ships not be able to be lined up on you so they can't weapons free next turn is potentially a game winning moves.
Yeah, it's and also I think they are the hidden gems in them is when people have planned ahead and say that, okay, I will max thrust with this guy so he's within that critical location which wins me the game. Then suddenly it's pointing backwards.
This is also true.
Yes. Mm. So going down the list, we start to look at all the cruisers. So we already hinted at that, and that is that all the particle weapons have now started to receive fusillade on them. So you have these narrow weapons that now suddenly get very powerful when they can go weapons free. So it's something that you probably will need to set up and plan ahead for to set up. But when you can get a full fusillade weapons free attack from a pair of granites, it will very much hurt the opposing player.
All right. Let's see. What else happened here? Oh, there was something with the diamond.
Yeah, yeah. Looking down at the diamond, we have all faced dreaded diamond, and it's the main gun. So what happened here is that it's a very slight nerf, but going in the same spirit as the other particle weapons, we have given it Fusillade 1, but we removed one attack from it to enable this. So now it's just 2 attacks with lock 2 plus damage 2, but Fusillade 1. So if you go weapon 3, you still have the same gun as you always loved. But if you don't go weapon 3, you are just 2 attacks.
And you still have good odds of double crippling a traditional cruiser. I mean,
Yes,
you can
yes.
do 4 damage, and then with the first cripple result, go
Yeah,
up to 6, and probably do
yeah.
another 2 more, if you get lucky enough. So,
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a big nerf, but it takes it away from this must-have ship that all Shaltari players wants to have. But instead, people should start looking at the Platinum, which got increased in its close action weapons, or perhaps even going down and look at the battle cruisers and say, perhaps I will have a Adamant instead as my admiral, or even go to the route for the dreadnoughts. The dreadnoughts have received some criticism from Shaltari players just because that they are so expensive.
well,
Uh,
that and they weren't diamonds.
yeah, of course. So the dreadnoughts they decrease 30 points for each of the dreadnoughts, bringing them down to 520 and 470. Uh, and also they got a slight decrease in their signature, so that they are signature 10 without shields up. Personally, I like the dreadnoughts and I think that they are viable, and I hope that they get to see more table time now that they have this little buff.
I think they will. I think once people get some games in with them.
Yep.
So now we're moving on to the squadron faction.
Yes. So UCM has had a reputation of having subpar guns. They have really beautiful ships, especially the gunships. I really like the look of. But everyone has said that gunships are just not worth it because their guns are so bad. So looking at this problem, we discussed it and thought about what makes UCM UCM. And you think of a military precision, they work in groups and they fire together. And from there, that discussion, we came about the squadron rule. And the squadron rule is something where the gunnery personnel of the UCM ships fire together, making the parts great, the sum of the parts greater than the parts themselves. And that means that if you have a group of ships, for example, a Toulons which have Squadron 3, if 3 of the Toulons fire the UF 2200s on the same ship, they get an additional D6 shots. And this potentially brings them up from 9 shots to 15 shots, 3 ships, which is actually pretty decent.
But yeah, I mean, the different uh, just their regular shots. Now that you're adding a D6 in, it helps make those ships more viable. Than, hey, how many more burn through can I bring?
Mm. And remember, if you have issues with rolling this D6 fast enough, be prepared. Have a D6 next to you that is dedicated just for the squadron rule.
Yeah, I mean, you can have some extra dice sitting around to scoop up.
Yep.
But with the squadron rules, uh, the Osaka, I got the Rio out.
Yeah, the Rio works as well.
Yeah. But I mean, you've got some new opportunities with these ships that
Yeah. So looking at the Osaka, which is one of these typical examples where people note and say that, hey, I see the Osaka, but I have the new Cairo next to it. Why should I ever take the Osaka? And looking at that, we said that, well, if we have a squadron of two Osakas and we have this D6, then you have on average, you will start getting better performance from this ship against low armor targets, while the New Cairo, of course, is the best ship if you're facing something that has 2+ armor, because of how burn through works. But with the amount of shots that you can put out, suddenly it's a very viable ships, especially against Shaltari or Scourge players.
yeah, I mean, so there are factions in the game that don't have the highest levels of armor.
Yeah, especially if you look at Shaltari with their shields up, they suddenly don't care about your burn through weapons crits. They still get their saves. Then you want the volume of fire instead.
I've been impressed with the squadron rule, and I think that just gives that little dynamic feel to a UCM fleet, so they're not the generic faction.
Yeah, it gives you some interesting choices actually, where you can start discussing then. If I am bringing Osakas, should I bring two and risk that I lose this benefit if I lose one, or should I take three so I have a little bit of buffer for this? Same thing with Toulons. Should I bring three and risk losing one and lose the rule, or should I bring four so that I make sure that I keep this rule a bit longer?
Yeah, it's been fun. I encourage people to get out there.
Yeah.
So what else happened to the cruisers?
Yeah, so one big thing that we did to the cruisers as well is that we have overall linked all the UF 4200 weapons. That's the 4+ lock, 4+ guns on the UCM ships. And these are all just secondary weapons that you can see on the San Franciscos, Madrids, Berlins, everything, these low quality weapons that it didn't make sense. No one wanted to go weapons free to fire two of these weapons
Right.
instead of one weapon with a San Francisco. That never happened. So we looked at it and said that no, these ships, they are a little bit too expensive compared to other ships that have the same abilities. So there is there is reasons to start linking these ships. And going down this route, we looked at the Moscow and said, okay, we have the Rio and we have Sakas which can do this on Squadron. Can you give Squadron to Moscow? No, the
No,
Moscow is
no.
more of a solitary gun platform. And when you look at the Moscow, what do you imagine? Yeah, you imagine all the guns blazing, the ship driving around, firing in all directions. So we thought, yeah, let's just link these 4200s that are now linked, link them to one of the UF 6400s, so that you can have these guns blazing.
So you get a decent quality of shots, and you get more if you weapons free. But now the Moscow is putting out some steady firepower.
Yes. And with a points decrease, it actually becomes a quite interesting, very cheap Admiral choice, especially if you're looking at 999 point games. It can be interesting to include a Moscow as the
That's very true.
Admiral.
Oh, you know, Patrick, we skipped over probably my favorite UCM change, the Havanas.
Yeah. So Havanas had, and this is back to the first playtesting of the destroyers back in last year, where the Havanas were changed from having light torpedoes to regular torpedoes in one of them. Just because we thought that, well, they will never be able to launch two torpedoes, because they will launch one torpedo then die because they are so close to the enemy. But with the changes to the torpedoes, we actually thought that it might be better for them to have the light torpedoes again. And light torpedoes are 4 damage torpedoes, but they have 2 of them.
And range 14 on the thrust.
Yes. So these are smaller torpedoes which can be used to fire on ships en masse. So I imagine I know I have a friend who's playing UCM and that loves his Havanas and likes to run 4 to 6 of them, launching torpedoes on battleships and things like that. And
Havanas will straight up murder things these days.
yes,
Like
yes,
it's not the Kiev has competition straight up.
exactly. Yeah. And this is one of these things again where we want to look at the different ships and try to not make them completely on par with each other uh, on the same things, doing the same things, but make them viable in the same way, so that you actually can see different roles for them and do different things with them, but still feel that you get the points worth for it.
All right. Any other big changes then for the UCM?
There are some smaller point changes to their battleships to get them a little bit more viable because they're awesome models and they're a little bit underplayed. So slight point decreases there. And then we have a very interesting change, which actually was something that we had discussed late in the Dreadnought development, but unfortunately never realized from the first iteration of the Dreadnoughts, and that was to give the London Aegis. Because if you look at that ship, it has an enormous amount of PD guns on it. And giving Aegis to it sort of represents its ability to just fill the area around it with support. Imagine Battlestar Galactica when it's engaging its anti-fighter guns all across.
It sure has a lot of guns.
Yes. So what we're trying to do here, also giving the slight point decrease, is to make it more viable as a counter or as a an alternative to the Washington, which we all know the power of.
The Washington is a great utility ship, but now
Yeah,
with the with Aegis being added onto the London, uh, you could make some really compelling fleets centered around the London.
yes.
All right, I
And
think that's
remember also that Aegis affects the ship itself. So it's got a very impressive point defense on itself. So I don't think anyone will try to overwhelm it with bombers anytime soon.
But if you are UCM, you could just bring a ton of Havanas and just torp it to death.
Yes, yes. That has never happened in history. A big dreadnought being torpedoed by a swarm of smaller ships.
Well, it was relatively unheard of in Drop Fleet before.
Yeah, but yeah, I hope I can live to see that happen.
Well, come to Adepticon, Patrick. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen.
Yes. Mhm. So I hope that people like these changes and that they will have fun building new lists and experience some new opportunities and new options. One thing that is worth noting for those people that are building these lists for Adepticon is that the DF list has not been updated with these changes. So if you create your, as of the recording of this video, so if you build your list, make sure that you double check the point score so you don't go over points.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Patrick. Because I'm going to have to look at everybody's list come Adepticon.
Yes.
All right,
So
well,
yeah, I think we can spend just 1 minute also to mention that we did append the FAQ section from the old documents in this section, but we have also updated with a couple of new answers and clarifications directly from Dave and TT Combat.
perfect. Yeah,
Uh,
it was great that Dave was able to give some, actually a lot of input on this. So,
yeah,
he directed a lot of this development here, told us different places that things could not go and why, and So that's very interesting, and I think overall the community is going to receive a very polished product once this is officially released.
I think the same. It's been a pleasure working with him and the other team. It's been a large group of people giving input to this, and everyone's been really engaged, and we had several interesting discussions. On top of that, I also would like to thank some of the guys from the Facebook group that did not know that they were giving input to this as well while they were discussing things with me. So I would like to thank them for all the interesting discussions as well.
Yeah, the Facebook there's been what I think it's like close to 500 posts on the Cleveland Clash errata, and a lot of that was looked at and
Yeah,
discussed, and so very appreciative to everybody involved in that whole discussion.
yeah.
So yeah, if there's any questions, go ahead and post about it on Facebook, and we'll get back to you.
Hmm? Thanks everyone.